Okay, good morning. We're still looking at the Rebbe's Haggadah, Rebbe's commentary of the Haggadah, and now we're going to look at Rebbe's commentary on the precise language used when describing the sandwich. Before we eat the sandwich, before we eat the korach, we read the paragraph Kain Asa Hillel, so Hillel would do, and Rebbe's going to break down the exact wording. I was thinking about what we learned yesterday, and I think we're going to address this when we get more in depth, God willing, in the next few weeks. Something that the Rebbe adds that's not at least explicitly stated in the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch. So I'm just going to open the floor. You can think about it. If you go back to the maybe the second page, no, first page. Yeah, the first page there, bottom left, Korach. So after that, Rebbe explains, based on the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, that in Hillel's view, you have in the times of the Beis Hamikdash, you had to eat it all together. Without the Beis Hamikdash, in order to fulfill the matzah, you may not eat maror with it. And maror must include the matzah with it. Right? Matzah biblical may not have maror with it, because that'll diminish the flavor. But the maror, which is rabbinic, to remember the way it was done in the Beis Hamikdash time, has to have matzah with it, because according to Hillel, let's say you did it when the Beis Hamikdash was done. Right? Then there are adds after the parentheses, yeah? Nimtza, the result is, yesh, this part is not in the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch explicitly. Nimtza, the result is, yesh alav bizman hazeh, he has today, chiyuv matzah shein midrabanan. A second, do you have it?
See here?
Bottom left, Rebbe's commentary.
Oh.
Bottom left. Last paragraph.
Yeah.
Nimtza, the result is, yesh alav, he has upon him, bizman hazeh nowadays, chiyuv matzah shein midrabanan. A second obligation of matzah rabbinically. That's Hillel according to Hillel. That line is not in the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch explicitly. And everything was understood until that, even without that line. He already explained before. In temple times, you have to eat matzah and maror together according to Hillel, with Pesach. Nowadays, there's no Pesach. Matzah is biblical, rabbinic. Matzah is biblical, therefore must be eaten alone without maror. Maror is rabbinic, according to Hillel. You have to have matzah with it in order to fulfill it. Finished. Let's have to have a sandwich. Then the adds, comes out that you have a second obligation to eat matzah. A second obligation to eat matzah, which is rabbinic. Why did they add that word, those wording? Everything was fine without that. And it's not explicitly stated in the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch. I have an idea as to what the answer might be. I'm just opening the floor, and God willing, when we unpack it more in depth, I want to address that question. Just something to think about. You see what I'm asking?
Yeah, like there's already been a.
It's already established.
Why is there a rabbinic?
Well, there's a rabbinic mitzvah to eat maror, and in order to fulfill that maror, you have to have matzah with it. Then the Rebbe concludes, the resulting is that he has a second obligation to eat matzah rabbinically. Why is that sentence necessary?
Maybe that's the catalyst for the maror.
Okay.
Because they to be on the same plane as the maror to be able to eat.
Right, but the reason why you're eating the second matzah is not because you have an obligation to eat matzah. No, but because you have an obligation to eat maror. And in order to do the maror, you have to eat the matzah with it. But the Rebbe seems to be saying that there's an obligation to eat matzah a second time rabbinically.
Maybe it's only to satisfy the maror obligation.
Right, but that was understood before that line. Right? Because
well, it was in dispute.
Let's go back 3 lines. Yeah, the Eini Yotzi Decheves Maror, you won't fulfill your maror obligation. Shetiknu Chacham Zek in the Mikdash, which the sages established to remember the temple times. Elem Kein Karcham Matzah, unless you also have matzah with it. That's it. In order for the maror obligation to be fulfilled nowadays, you have to have matzah with it. We already established that. Then there are adds. The result is that you have a second matzah obligation, which is rabbinic. Why is that? Why is that necessary? What changed? What added? What's added here? I didn't know before. Why is it necessary? Anyway, just open the floor to think about it. Yeah, sorry.
Tell me, when you take the maror is wet with the matzah, when the matzah becomes wet, it becomes hametz.
Not exactly. Okay, we'll leave that alone for now. Yeah, you following what I'm asking?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, just something to think about. To come with an answer.
I'm not sure clear on.
So think about it. I have it. My idea is, I want to see if I'm right, is because the Shulchan Aruch told us, right, that from when you, and the Gemara said this also, from when you make the bracha on matzah, You may not talk till after you eat the sandwich. Yeah. Okay. Which mitzvah obligation are you fulfilling when you eat the sandwich? Matzah or maror? Maror. So why is it necessary that from matzah till after sandwich you don't talk? What's more necessary is from maror till after sandwich you don't talk. Seemingly, the bracha of matzah is no extension to the kodesh.
Because you've already satisfied them.
You did the biblical obligation for matzah. If as we're learning from Rebbe, the mitzvah of maror, the mitzvah of sandwich is only because in order to fulfill the mitzvah of maror according to Rabbi Hillel, you have to have matzah with it. Then seemingly it's only necessary to refrain from talking from the maror bracha till after sandwich. Why from the matzah bracha till after sandwich? Unless, and this is what I think what the Rebbe is adding here is that by dint of the fact that the maror requires your matzah, you now have a new obligation of matzah rabbinically, and for that mitzvah you have to have the bracha of matzah. We need to explain why that is and how that is.
Yeah, why that is. Why do you need to eat matzah with the maror?
Well, you do have to satisfy maror, but somehow that means that the matzah also becomes a rabbinic obligation that seems to require a bracha also maybe, which is why you can't talk from the matzah after l'karech. But why is that? Perhaps the reason is like this. I'm thinking now out loud, and hopefully when we unpack it more in depth, I hope to be able to make the case for this, or in my unpacking it, I'll find out I'm wrong. One of the two.
Okay.
Either I'll find out I'm wrong, or
Doesn't really matter.
I'll back it up. But here's my thinking.
Exercise.
Exactly this. I'm sharing the exercise with you. So here's what I'm thinking. What is the obligation of remembering the way it was in temple times tomorrow? What's the obligation? What is the obligation? You don't have Pesach offering now. So therefore, your maror is compromised because your maror only came along with Pesach. Right? But eat it now to remember the way it was in temple times. Which means the obligation is not really to eat maror. The obligation is to eat maror in remembrance of temple. So if you highlight maror component, we used to have a mitzvah maror, we no longer have it, eat maror to make up for it.
Sorry for the interruption. Maror was once biblical.
Yes, because the Torah said to eat the Pesach with maror. So because Pesach no longer, therefore maror is no longer biblical. Therefore it's rabbinic. Yeah. So what's the institution of the sages? You can look at it in two ways. You can say the institution is, look, we used to have maror, we don't have maror, now eat maror. If that's the case, the primary obligation here is the maror component.
And that's what the sages would argue.
And that's what sages would argue. Because it always was maror alone. Or you can go the other way, say no. The primary obligation is not actually to eat maror. The primary obligation is to consume food as they would have in temple times. The only one missing now is maror. Or the only missing one now you can do is maror. There's the other one. The other missing one is Pesach, which you can't do. But the only missing one which you can't do is maror. But the obligation is not to eat maror because we used to eat maror. The obligation is to eat the way they would have eaten in temple times as much as you can. Which is now Pesach and maror, which is now matzah and maror in Hillel's view.
You already did matzah.
The biblical obligation, but not the obligation to remember the temple. So now the kodesh means, I'm flipping on its head. We learned from the Rebbe that the mitzvah of maror, mitzvah of kodesh is, in order to fulfill the maror properly, you have to have matzah with it. Now we're learning, no, your obligation is to remember temple. And in order to do that, you have to have matzah and maror equally together. So it means you have a rabbinic obligation to eat matzah a second time. And thus the bracha of your matzah biblically also goes to your rabbinic matzah. Maybe. Anyway, this is my thinking, my train of thought at the moment.
No bracha on maror.
No. And the Gemara tells us, don't talk from the beginning of matzah till after because you have to, right? The Gemara said, not just the Al Shulchan Aruch, right? Where's the Gemara? I'm pretty sure it's explicit in the Gemara. Not just in the Shulchan Aruch, it's definitely explicitly there, that you may not talk from matzah till after. And if I remember correctly, the Gemara says it too. Yeah, the Gemara doesn't say explicitly you can't talk, but it's implicit from the Gemara. what I'm saying now actually works perfectly in the words of the Gemara. Because here's the Gemara's words. I'm just giving you my train of thought as it's happening to me, as I'm looking thinking about it. So again, when I unpack it, maybe I'll find that I'm wrong. But for now, this is what I'm thinking. Let's see. So here, look at the Gemara. I want to read the Gemara with you.
Okay. Another copy.
Right here. It's okay. I got it.
Not for
So the Gemara reads like this, yeah? The first line, it's a wide line, last word. Hashta now. Like Rabbanon, we don't have the halacha, not like Hillel, not like Rabbanon, we don't know who it is. Which means, in the Alter Rebbe's view, we don't know whether in temple times you may eat them separately, or whether in temple times you have to eat them together.
But we did know from Hillel.
We don't know who the halacha is. Is it like the Hillel or the sages?
Oh, okay.
Right? So we don't know whether we follow the sages, which is, this is not the, sorry?
I'm understanding.
Following?
Yeah.
This is not the way Rashbam learns the Gemara. This is without Rebbe's learning the Gemara.
How are you reading in the Alter Rebbe's point of view from the Gemara? Are you reading?
No, I'm just interpreting it based on what we know.
Sorry.
So because we don't know that halacha follows Hillel, whether you have to eat them together in biblical times, or whether you have in temple times, or whether you may eat them separately in temple times, and therefore, when you're remembering Mar today, I don't know, should you be eating it separate, alone, as they would in temple times, like sages, or whether you eat it together, like they would have done, like Hillel, in order to remember temple times. What do? You make the bracha on matzah. You eat the matzah. Then you eat the marar, make the bracha on marar. You eat the marar. And then you eat matzah and lettuce together. To remember the temple like Hillel. Not zecher lemarar. Not to remember the mitzvah of marar, but to remember the temple. And in temple times, you would have eaten matzah and marar together. And therefore, the rabbinic obligation to remember temple times is equally on the marar and the matzah.
Seems like it's circuitous reasoning, because they're concluding that you would eat them together, but they started off the question is we don't know.
So to fulfill all of them, they have to do it. So to eat all of them, that's what Alter Rebbe learns is the way they learns. That's why you have to eat all of them. You have to eat the matzah because that's biblical. You have to eat the marar because the sages say the marar would have been eaten alone. And then you have to eat them together as Hillel would have done it in temple times. But the mitzvah is the zeichel mikdash.
The dilemma still remains that they don't know. You're
fine, so you're doing both.
You're doing both.
That's fine.
We learned that yesterday.
Okay, but I'm adding here, what I'm learning here is that the primary here is not zecher l'marar. Not that we're eating a rabbinic marar to remember the marar, and in order to do that, we have to eat it with matzah. But you have to remember the temple. And in temple, you would have eaten both. And therefore, the Rebbe's line that you eat the matzah, and the nimtzah, the result is you have a second obligation to eat matzah rabbinically, is not just an extension of marar, but actually an extension of the same thing from which the marar derives, which is to remember the temple. Remembering the temple includes both matzah and marar equally.
But you're saying though, but people are doing the bracha over marar separately also.
Why not?
Right.
Your rabbinic obligation to do so.
Then the korach is for both remembering what they've done in temple times, not only as to the marar, but as to the matzah.
Correct. Which is why the bracha of matzah extends to the kodesh also, which is why you can't talk from the beginning of matzah till the end of kodesh. That's my rationale here.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Follow? That's my rationale here. Where was the source for this idea that you can't talk from the beginning of matzah till tomorrow? It was only in the Shulchan Aruch? It wasn't mentioned in the Gemara.
I don't think it was mentioned I don't think we went over it.
Yeah. It was implicit in the way the Gemara describes it. Like you eat the matzah, you make the matzah and you eat. You make the bracha matzah and you eat. Which is also important. Why did the Gemara have to say, because we don't know if we follow Hillel or the sages, first make a bracha on matzah, eat matzah. Then make a bracha on marar, eat marar. Seemingly the part of making a bracha on matzah and eating the matzah is irrelevant to the dispute of Hillel and the sages. Matzah is biblical anyway. Why is that put into the statement here? Because according to Hillel,
that's not in disagreement with any.
Exactly. So why is it mentioned here? Because That's the
Because
point
of
of
the
it.
extension of
Oh,
the
that's right,
bracha.
because of the extension of the bracha for the matzah till the kodesh. Because in Hillel's view, your matzah is incomplete also until you, or not your matzah is incomplete, but your matzah must be now.
Means that there's another obligation for
Oh,
matzah
that's right.
to remember the time.
There's another obligation, and that's why
why
they have the
we
bracha.
can't
Oh, that's right.
break the-
And that's why they have all three in a row. Which is the Gemara brings the matzah a mitzvah here, even though it's irrelevant. The question is about moror.
Right, but that makes sense.
Ah.
That's why it's mentioned.
Oh,
Because
that's
if you
exactly.
have no other reason to mention the matzah.
Video. I think it's all from that added line from the Rebbe there. Second. It's all from that added line from the Rebbe, adding that you have a second matzah, you have a second obligation to eat matzah rabbinically.
For a different reason.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Which
And
seemingly
it's not for Mara.
which is not explicit in the Alter Rebbe.
And it's not because of Mara.
Here.
Because Mara was already done anyway.
Correct.
And
But it's for the Zeichel Mikdash, to remember the temple. And remembering temple includes matzah and moror.
meaning what they have done.
Exactly. Which includes moror, matzah equally. And not just if you have a rabbinic obligation to eat moror, and by extension you have to have matzah with it. Okay, let's see.
So, but it sounds like then, based on that reasoning, that Hillel would be the primary.
No, it's why. Why are you saying that?
Because how they would have, you're remembering how they would have eaten it in temple times, which would have been eaten together. No?
Okay, only according to Hillel. According to the sages, you would have eaten them separately. At least you could have eaten them
So when
separately.
you say we do this quark sandwich to remember what they would have done in temple times, it's only based on what they would have done in temple times, according to Hillel.
But the moror alone is based on the sages. Because that's how they would have done it in temple times.
Okay, all right. So then we're remembering the quark based on what Hillel would have done in temple.
Oh, in fact, okay, what? Sorry, wait.
sorry.
Yes, we're doing both. So finish this off. I'm sorry.
No, I'm saying we're following what we've been done in temple times, according to Hillel, eating the Korach. This Korach sandwich, we're following, we're doing both.
Yes.
Because we're following what they would have done temple times according to Hillel.
And according to the others, which would be matzah and moror separately.
Okay.
Exactly.
No, but we were focusing on the Korach.
Exactly. Precisely.
Okay.
Which now adds something else. The Alter Rebbe writes. Go back to the Alter Rebbe, the Haggadah there. Yeah.
That's the same paragraph?
No, back to the first page. Oh, no, it's not here. Sorry. We didn't learn it. But on the instruction of matzah, we don't have it on the page here.
Oh.
But during the instruction of matzah, the Alter Rebbe writes, when you make the bracha on matzah, you should have in mind the kodesh.
Oh, the first time you do the bracha.
Yeah, why do they have in mind the kodesh? According to the Alter Rebbe's Shulchan Aruch directly, the kodesh is an extension of moror, not of matzah. So why do you have to have in mind? And he does, in the Shulchan Aruch doesn't mention.
Why?
In the Shulchan Aruch, the Alter Rebbe does not say when you eat the bracha on matzah, it doesn't say you have to have in mind the sandwich.
Oh, okay.
But what in the Siddur, on Haggadah,
Oh.
when he makes the bracha on matzah, he says, please have in mind the sandwich.
The Rebbe says that.
Yes. Why?
Have in mind the kork when you're doing the bracha on matzah.
Well, actually, in Top Pei Bays, okay, I'm going to reserve comment on that. But he does say,
I'm trying to keep up with you. It's hard.
sorry, it could be in two, it could be several else in Shulchan Aruch. It does say to have in mind. But anyway, the point, the halach is, the Alter Rebbe writes that you have to have in mind the matzah during the bracha for matzah, you have to have in mind the sandwich. If, as the Alter Rebbe told us, the only reason for sandwich is to satisfy the obligation to have moror, then why do you have to have in mind the bracha? Why do you have to have that in mind during the bracha of matzah?
Because you're not making a bracha during the korach, so you need that extension.
But why? If the matzah of kodesh is only to satisfy moror, the main thing is to have in mind during moror of the kodesh. Why do you have to have in mind during matzah of the kodesh? The matzah of kodesh is why is it there?
It's not for the more though. It's for the.
So based on what I said, that's my answer.
That's
what I'm saying. So based on what I just said, it's announced, understood. Based on what I'm saying, it's understood A, why you cannot talk, and B, why you actually have to have a mind. During the matzah, you have to have a mind of kodesh also. Because the matzah of kodesh is not only to satisfy the moror obligation, but actually both the matzah and moror come from a unique hierarchy obligation to remember temple.
So that bracha carries two intents.
Correct. The biblical obligation plus the rabbinic obligation to remember temple. And the rabbinic obligation to remember temple, according to Hillel, is to have matzah and moror together.
The question: If you didn't have that intent for that korach during your first bracha on matzah, would that entitle you then to make a separate bracha on that korach?
No, because maybe the halacha doesn't follow Hillel, and then it might be a wasted bracha. But yes, the Alter Rebbe does address that. A good question. Okay, let's learn a little bit. A few minutes
Tomorrow.
from the Rebbe's Haggadah. We're going to look at, where is it? The second page. It says Peites, top left. The Yoimar Zeh. The Alter Rebbe said that you should take matzah, put it together with maror. The Yoimar Zeh, you should say this. And then he says what you should say is, Kenos Hillel, this is what Hillel used to do, yeah? But his instruction is, V'yoymar zeh, say this. Says the Rebbe, L'chura seemingly, zeh, the word this, yiter loshenhu, is an extra word. He could have just said, and you should say, dot to a colon, Kenos Hillel. Why V'yoymar zeh, and you should say this? Why emphasize this? Just say V'yoymar, and you should say, Kenos Hillel. You should say this, Kenos Hillel.
So this comes to mean something,
Ah.
obviously. It's meaning, I don't know.
So let's see. Ulai, perhaps, Madgish, says the Rebbe, the Alter Rebbe is highlighting, Sheyemar Dafken Nusach Zu. The Alter Rebbe is saying, I'm being precise in the exact wording that I want you to read before you eat the koirach. Because there are other versions, and I don't want you to read those. I want you to read this one. Say this. Not just say, generally speaking, this is what Hillel used to do, and pick whichever version there is to that statement of what Hillel used to do. But reading the version I'm sharing with you.
Oh, because apparently there's multiple versions.
There are multiple versions. Hainu, namely, Hashmotas Hatevas Zecher LeMikdash Kehilel. We don't add the words Zecher LeMikdash Kehilel, remembering the temple like Hillel. We don't say that. We just read. If you look at the next page, you can see the exact text we read. Top of the line. That's tzaddik, the next page. Opposite, yeah. Top of the line. Cain asa Hillel. This is what Hillel did. Bisman shebes mikdash kaim, at the time when the temple stood. Haya koirach, he would wrap Pesach matzah and mar, the Pesach matzah together. Va'oichel b'yarachad, and eat together. Kamosh Nemar, the verse reads, Al matzah sabim yachlu, on matzahs and mara you shall eat it, the Pesach offering. But we don't say zeichel mikdash kehillel, which other people do. Says the Alter Rebbe, says the Rebbe, when the Alter Rebbe says read this, he means don't say those words zeichel mikdash kehillel.
Was there any particular reason?
Let's see.
not to?
What will go?
We're gonna see. Sorry?
What will go opposite way of Hillel?
Sorry?
Why are you going opposite against Hillel?
We're not doing that. Chas v'shalom.
No?
Okay. And number two, we're going to explain, I think everybody's going to explain this all soon. Pesach. We add the word Pesach.
Where are we reading from? Sorry.
Back to the Rebbe's text on the left side. Last word on the top on the left. Tevas Pesach. The Alter Rebbe wants you to say the word Pesach. Meaning, go back to the text on the opposite side of the page. Cain also Hillel is what Hillel did. In the time the base Mikdash stood, he would wrap Pesach, matzah, and maror. We are not wrapping Pesach, matzah, and maror. We're only wrapping matzah and maror. And yet, when we describe what Hillel did, we say
that's why
Pesach,
we don't
matzah, and maror.
say those words, because you're leaving out the Pesach.
So, well, let's see. We'll see how they're going to unpack that. But others take the word Pesach out because we're not putting the Pesach in.
Right.
Nonetheless, they're out there telling us, read it this way. I want you to say the word Pesach. And I don't want you to say the words Zeichel Mikdash Hillel, to remember the Mikdash like Hillel. Just to describe what Hillel used to do.
Right,
And the truth is, Hillel did have Pesach.
We're not doing what, but we still need to remember.
So we're saying what he did, which is he also ate Pesach. Okay, so now let's go through the actual text as the Rebbe explains it on the top right of Tzaddik, under the line. Yeah. Okay, so Cain Asa, etc., Hoyakayim, etc., Pesach, etc. This is what Hillel used to do, etc., at the time when the temple stood, etc., Pesach, Matzah, Maror, etc. Okay. Cain who, this is the language, this is the precise liturgy, the Siddur Kol Yaakov. This is the Rebbe speaking now. This is the exact language as it appears in the Siddur called Kol Yaakov. This is the Siddur of Rabbi Yaakov Emden, that controversial figure we looked about once upon a time in the summer. Yeah, the one who was in that controversy with the
castle.
No, that's in Maram Rottenberg.
Oh, sorry.
He was the one that was with the controversy over the Shabbat Tzvi amulet.
Oh, right, the amulet.
Yes, that was him. The one who had a published printing press in his house. Okay, so he made a siddur called Kol Yaakov. I think that's a siddur. Okay. The Chen Kosav Gam B'Chok Yaakov. So too it's also written in the Chok Yaakov. The Chok Yaakov is a commentary to the Shulchan Aruch, one of the super commentaries. And Be'ed Heitev or Mishnah Brura, also commentary to the Shulchan Aruch, the famous Mishnah Brura. Valpia Safas Torah based on the additions of the Taz. Ella Shehem Hishmitu Tevas Haya Harishona. They took out the first was. And likewise, the first word was is not in the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch. See further. I'm going to explain what this is all about. So let's look again above the line. Let's see what the Rebbe is talking about. Keinos Hillel is what Hillel did. In the time when the temple was in existence, there are those who take up the first Haya was, and it would read, "This is what Hillel did in the times when the temple stood." Not in the time the temple was standing. See it? The first Haya doesn't need to be there. So all the people that the Rebbe just cited to have the same text as Alter Rebbe, they just don't have that first Haya. So they would read, "This is what Hillel did when the temple stood." Whereas we're saying, "This is what Hillel did when the temple was standing." That extra was. Okay? And Rebbe's going to explain why his view as to why the Alter Rebbe went with this exact wording, and we'll leave that for tomorrow because it's a longer point. Rebbe's going to make all the things we mentioned. Why don't we say Zechel Mikdash Hillel to remember the Beis Mikdash Hillel? Why are we adding the word Pesach? Why adding the word Haya? All these wordings that the Rebbe said, the Alter Rebbe told us, you should say this way, not in the other way. Rebbe's going to explain why all those words are precisely where they are. That's going to come tomorrow. Good morning.
So
Yeah.
I was wondering why it's mentioned in the text here. Korah, Pesach, Matzah. What is there any significance to the order? Because the order seems to be inverted.
Why?
Because Korah usually comes after this.
No, Korach means you would wrap. Haya Korach, he would wrap.
Oh, wrap. Oh, I see. It's
He
not.
would wrap.
Okay,
It's not description.
doing it.
It's not a description of.
Right. Oh, I
We
see.
have it as a title, but he
No,
has it
I
as an
understand.
action.
Okay, fine.
Yeah. Good question. Yeah.
Makes sense. Makes sense.
He would wrap the Pesach
Wrap
Matzah and March.
and-
So we call it Korach.
Wrapping and then right.
Yeah.
You would do it all in one. Not one.
Anyway, it's always good to be able to share my train of thought with others and
Yeah.
bounce it off.
Thank you.
And again, God willing, I get one pack and hopefully I'll sustain my position. Otherwise, I'll learn that I was wrong. Either way, this
Either
is
way,
this
it's a
Kachi
great-
Darka Shelterda.
Great learning.
Yeah. Okay, wonderful day, Yidden.
Okay.